Morning all. My name is Ken Olinger. I was a general medical practitioner in Ireland for nearly 40 years. During that time, I cared for, in some cases, 4 generations of certain families. I've been involved, I'm retired now. I've been involved with End of Life Ireland for probably about 3 to 4 years. End of Life Ireland is the only active lobbying agency for medical assistance in death legislation. And as many of you know and have heard this morning, there have been Dáil committee meetings over 9 months, hearing presentations from concerned individuals, groups, and the committee's recommendations for proceeding to drafting legislation have now been published. So, having retired and being what I now describe as a civilian, in the future, I will not be involved with consultations with patients, nor will I be prescribing or carrying out the administration of medication when this legislation is passed. So why am I here this morning? Why have I been a member of End of Life Ireland for the past few years? And why do I want to see this important law passed? During my years in practice, I can really only recall 2 patients who requested to consider my assistance in helping them to die. One was a man probably in his early 60s who had had multiple sclerosis for many, many years and had become quadriplegic and was in the care of a nursing home for a long time. The other was an older man with progressively worsening pain and debility due to metastatic prostate cancer. Both were completely mentally competent and were well informed as to their conditions and their prognoses. At the time, I was unable to fulfill their requests because of the illegality of such measures. And as a result, their physical and mental distress were prolonged and upsetting for both them and their families. In retrospect, I'm sure that I should have had a good many other end-of-life choice discussions with a lot of other patients over the years. But I'm also sure that doctors and patients worldwide have been in these similar situations, and that an increasing number of patients will ask for advice about their options for pain and distress-free deaths. Now, over the years, I have been grateful for the expertise and the compassion of hospice and palliative care teams who taught me a great deal about not just pharmacology, but about the end-of-life care in general. I believe that palliative care and medical assistance in dying should be, and are in some places, complementary, not exclusionary. Palliative care will always be essential and require adequate funding, accessibility, and timely intervention. But experience shows that the control of all symptoms will ultimately fail for some patients. Despite high percentages of those with terminal illnesses engaging with palliative care, there's a cohort that will seek medical assistance in dying due to their unresolved physical and mental suffering, and even the side effects of their treatment. Today, however, I will present a narrative illustrating a case for medical assistance in dying, although from the United States, in 2016, in a state which had not passed such legislation. Dr. M had practiced as a general internist for over 60 years. He'd been clinical associate professor of medicine at the College of Medicine and Dentistry of that state, and the medical director of the hospital to which he had had admitting privileges for decades. He'd been an athlete in secondary school and university, in track and field events, and served in the US Army from 1944 to 1946. Well into his 80s, he played golf and jogged. And although he no longer practiced medicine, he attended grand rounds well into his 90s. Dr. M suffered from peripheral arterial disease, which gradually worsened his intermittent claudication of his lower limbs. Unfortunately, vascular studies showed that he had small vessel disease, which meant neither surgical nor medical treatment were indicated. So he therefore persevered walking every day. Although daily meant requiring as time went on, he rested a little more than he walked because of the intense ischemic pain in his legs. In his last months, his circulatory problems became so severe that he became housebound and had to sleep in a chair with the slight gravitational advantage for his circulation that provided. While he was well aware of the prognosis of his disease, the only analgesia he took was a paracetamol-hydrocodone combination, a relatively mild opiate which really did little to relieve his pain. He was reluctant to take anything stronger because he felt the side effects would incapacitate him further. As his pain became more intense and severe, his daughter-in-law and his son, who was also a doctor, were moved to discuss with him more appropriate pain management and hospice home care intervention. With his consent, and after consulting Dr. M's primary care physician, a colleague of Dr. M's for many years, it was agreed that seek hospice care at home. This proved to be problematical because Dr. M had not been technically diagnosed with a terminal illness as such. It was the third hospice agency which finally accepted the case. Eventually, Dr. M, with the intervention of hospice home care and appropriate analgesics and anxiolytics, died at home at the age of 98. Not bad. This clinical account, however, has left out some pertinent and poignant details. At one point, in the last months of his life, Dr. M had stopped eating for 3 days in an attempt to end his suffering through starvation, a measure of his desperation and causing dismay for himself and his family. Near the end of his life, too, he had to be treated at home by a wound specialist when he developed black necrotic patches on his toes and feet, a horrifying personal ordeal for an experienced physician or anybody. And finally, after his funeral, in the basement of his home, his family, in clearing out his effects, found vast amounts of oral and parenteral drugs, lethal amounts of opiates, benzodiazepines, and even barbiturates, amounts that would not have been appropriate for the type of medical practice in which he had been active all those years. Dr. M's son was under no illusion that this cash would have been for anything other than a self-administered fatal dose. However, it was found that all were out of date, usually by several years. Tragically, any attempt to avail of them would likely have been in vain. Dr. M died in 2016, and it wasn't until 2019 that the state of New Jersey where he'd lived all his life, legislated for medical assistance in dying. Dr. Mervyn Olinger was my father. You know, we know that we can't prevent death and terminal illness, but we also know that we can't always control the symptoms or provide the comfort for the existential fear that may accompany them. But we can offer hope for that precious period of time to those near the ends of their lives and their families by offering the autonomy of informed personal choice with dignity and compassion. Not only have these been the basis for medical assistance in dying protocols around the world, but indeed, they're the same duties of care that have been the foundation of all medical care for millennia. Over 20 years' experience has shown no significant evidence of MAID being driven by social vulnerability, physical disability, coercion, and the increasing number of patients who are availing of such protocols, though still a tiny minority, it doesn't provide evidence of a slippery slope. Rather, such numbers provide an endorsement of this choice of end of life. I'm an advocate for medical assistance in dying on behalf of my former patients and yours. It'll take some time, but I'm sure that Ireland will draft and pass this legislation. Ask yourselves these questions. What do each of us want for ourselves, for our loved ones, for our patients, when we come to the ends of our lives? I believe that medical assistance in death is ethical, compassionate, and a human right. And I believe that my father would have agreed.